Hello and welcome everyone again. Welcome to today's webinar on the Asian Transport Outlook. My name is Alice Yu. I'm from the ESCAP Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, and I'll be conducting today's webinar. So before we start, we would like to remind everyone to please kindly mute yourself if you're not speaking, and you're very welcome to turn your camera off as well. If you encounter any technical or logistical problems while you're using Zoom, you're very welcome to also look at the chat box where we post a package or some instructions about how to use the conferencing system. You can make use of the chat box function if you have any questions during the webinar. There will also be a short Q&A session at the end as well. So without further ado, we would like to start the webinar, and we would like to turn over the time to Jamie. So Jamie Lether, who is the chief of the transport sector group of the Asian Development Bank, he will be giving us the welcome remarks. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alice. And thank you to everyone who's taken the time out of your busy schedules to join this event. It's some joint work between ADB and SLOCAT, and we're very proud to be working with them on this. We've also reached out to a whole host of other donor partners, think tanks, other organizations. So this is really a concerted effort amongst the transport community to enhance and invigorate, numerous powerful words I can use, but I really do see this as an exciting time for transport. The power that data can provide us has the ability to really transform how we see our transport systems, how we plan our transport systems, how we measure, and how we monitor those as well. A key issue we're facing is trying to get as much efficiencies out of transport as possible. If we know what we're looking at and we know how many people are trying to access certain areas, be they rural areas, urban areas, or how many goods are trying to get through various logistics chains, information is at the key to that, both in terms of the operations, but also in terms of the users. I do believe that with smartphone technologies, satellite imaging, a whole host of new technologies, new approaches for data collection, data capture, data analysis, really moves us into a new area of work and how this can be used within transport. The ideal is to get perfect real-time knowledge of where every person and every good is trying to get to, and therefore give them the best advice in terms of which is the cheapest or the quickest route. Many passenger apps would do something similar. It's that kind of data. But within much of developing Asia, we are finding there's gaps within the data. And that means that perhaps some of the decisions are not based on perfect knowledge by a long way. So the Asian Transport Outlook is our effort, and this is an open effort. The database is available on our website. Everyone can access that. We see this as an opportunity for the data that is already out there to be shared more widely, for cross-referencing between different data sets, and most importantly, to utilize this data to have detailed discussions with those that are responsible for planning, implementing, monitor, or operating our transport systems, and utilizing that to see real actions. We're not this work is not just to create a database that would sit somewhere, and we want to use this database for better informed decision-making and actions, most importantly, the actions to deliver on better, more sustainable transport systems. The final thing I wanted to mention is that the data also gives us the ability to monitor some of the externalities of transport. It's not just a case of which missing pieces of infrastructure or what assets need to be maintained. We can also look at some of the externalities. We can measure congestion utilizing Waze or other urban transport data. We can monitor rural accessibility using satellite images as well. The power of data is there. But we can also look at some of the emissions associated with transport. If we know how many vehicle kilometers are driven, and we know what vehicle fleet stock, be they diesel, electric, or internal combustion engines of any sort, we can work out roughly what the emissions would be they PM emissions, CO2 emissions, NOxes or SOxes. So we can look at the environmental impact of the sector. We can also look at the economic costs. If so many hours are lost per day from congestion, what is the economic cost of that? Our current research suggests this is around 3 to 5% within Asian developing countries. That is a huge number. If we look at road safety and road crashes, again, an estimate of around 3 to 4% of GDP lost through road crashes. If we can monitor and utilize the data to understand where those issues, where the key issues are, and not just safe infrastructure, but better information for the drivers, for the vulnerable road users, for the post-crash care, the emergency response. The data has an ability to look at road safety. There's a whole host of the SDGs, whether it's rural access, urban access, road safety, emissions, and also climate change contributions from transport sector. That's why I said at the beginning, it's a really exciting time, I think, for transport. And ADB is working with many of our partners to make this database available, to analyze it, but as I said, most importantly, to utilize it to make sure actions are taken, and that those actions are directed to the most urgent needs and are directed to address some of these externalities that the sector is not performing very well within: road safety, emissions, and the like. So with that, I'll hand it back to Alice, but I do thank you all very much for attending. I hope we have a good session in terms of seeing what the Asian Transport Outlook can offer. But please, more importantly, ask the questions, see how you think the data can be used, what gaps there are in the data, reasons for that gap, how we can analyze it, and how we can utilize this to raise awareness of how the transport systems can improve and we can get more efficiency out of those transport systems. Thank you very much for your attention, and back to you, Alice.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for introducing the ATO and outlining the current challenges and gaps in data collection in the transport sector in Asia. And we know that ATO is indeed really playing a very important role in filling this gap and the opening up a lot of opportunities and horizon for us. So before we break into what ATOs is and how it helps in our individual work, we would like to do a little ice-breaking activity. So now is the time we invite all of our audience to please either take out your phone or open up your laptop and open up a browser where you can type in menti.com, and you need to enter the code. Nicola, can you please show the code again? And also, oh, we can see it. And if you can type it in the chat box, that would be great. So the code is 90908300. So we have 3 questions to help us understand our audience more, and I see that answers are coming in. We first would like to know your background. So it could be the area of interest that you're working in, or your expertise, or the type of work that you do, whether within or outside of the transport sector. So we'll take a few moments for the answers to kick in, but I mean, obviously, the more the answers are, the bigger the word is. So since it is about transport, a lot of us the word transport is very big, but we do see that there are also a significant number of us working on monitoring and evaluation. And we're gonna just let it play out a little bit before we summarize it. Okay, we're seeing a lot of architect, planner, and civil engineering and transportation engineering. So quite a bit of engineers there. Again, landscape architect, we see that. It's moving quite fast, but we're seeing environmental planner. We see a lot of planners, urban planners, city planners, environmental planners. We are seeing researchers, transport researchers. We are also seeing different types in terms of we're seeing infrastructure, transport infrastructure. And then you're very welcome to say whether you're working in the public sector or the private sector, if that helps. We're seeing policy, we're seeing economists, we're seeing a very great diverse group of people that are interested in our webinar today. And we're seeing energy and transport, which is also a very important nexus that ATO can contribute to. Great. Again, really grateful to see that we have a wide range of stakeholders being involved in this webinar, and I'm sure you will find this very useful to know how this can help your work. Again, very last note, we see that road safety is indeed a pretty big word here, so it means that a lot of people are actually working on this area, which is very important and one of the major topics that ATO works on. So because of time, we're going to switch to the next question. Nicola, if you can help us with that. Again, it's exactly the same code. You don't need to do anything, but just click on the next question. We would like to know what kind of information that you're most interested in, and whether you're interested in data or policy or both. And immediately we're seeing that a lot of people are interested in both. And among data and policy, we see that more people are interested in data more than policy. Okay. I would say the majority are voting for both, and that's a very reasonable answer because in order to have sound policy making, you do need strong data support. So, but it's very good to know that for a majority of us, data and policy are both very important, and ATO does address both. So it will be, again, really useful for your work. Okay, so now that the answers are slowing down, we're going to go to the third question. What kind of data and policy information that you're interested in? So again, this is a free answering question. You can type, I think, up to 3 answers. Just any topics, areas of interest, or transport modes that you're most interested in. Okay, we'll again let a few moments for it to kick in. It started with very even distribution of different types, but then public transport pops up. It means that a lot of people actually do fall for public transport, and road safety, logistics are some major major topics that people are interested in. But even among the smaller, the topics in smaller fonts, we do see a very diverse topics being raised in here. And it's very exciting to know that, in fact, there's so many areas of work that we need to pay attention to in terms of sustainable low carbon transport and transport in general in Asia. And understanding that, like what I said before, public transport, road safety, logistics, mass transit is very similar to public transport. Yeah, those are the ones that stand out, but it doesn't mean that the other ones are not important to people, right? It's just that I think because we do have a very diverse group of stakeholders and experts today, so our topics might be very different, but all of these are very important. So I do hope that you find today's webinar useful to see how ATO does address the type of information that you're looking for. And you're very welcome again to make use of the chat box function or follow up with our colleagues later on after this webinar to see how that can apply to your work. So if you want to keep on typing, that's fine. The cloud will keep on rolling, and we can share the work cloud as a result of the webinar later on. But now we'll turn over the time for Courtney Hoisenha, who is the co-lead of ATO, and he will take us into a deep dive into the ATO, helping us to understand the rationale and the structure of it, and also exploring how the data and the policy information works out and the evolution of the ATO. So Courtney, I'll turn over the time to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alice and Jamie. First of all, a word of warning, even though that I'm based in the Netherlands, my internet connection is not super stable. So sometimes it drops, but it drops only for some 9 or 10 seconds. So don't panic that the webinar is in danger. I will come back. Very interesting to look at the latest word cloud. I was trying to look very quickly, as I will mention that we have 423 indicators in the ATO. There was one word that I saw that I'm pretty much certain that we do not have at the moment, and that is blockchain. So far, we don't have any blockchain related indicators. Nicola, first slide. And when I ask for the next slide, usually it takes a few seconds before the slide is loaded. So I think that Jamie had already spoken about let's see, why the ADB decided to do the ATO. And in short, ADB is doing about 40 transport projects per year. On an average year, it spends about $6 to $8 billion in new approvals. And the idea was, can we have a more institutionalized process for data and information collection and analysis and documentation to support the about 150 people in the Asian Development Bank who are actually working to deliver this transport assistance. And then obviously, in addition to this, as Jamie also mentioned, we want to support the governments in the ATO region in the development of transport policy and delivery. We want to see how are we doing with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and other relevant international agreements. And we want to actually encourage and enable research on the transport sector in the Asia Pacific region. And while we're doing this, we think that other bilateral and multilateral donors will also be able to benefit from the information that we are collecting and that we are making available. Next slide. It seems that it takes a few more than a few seconds, but anyway. Okay, so what are we looking at in the ATO? We are currently looking at 51 countries and regions. 49 of those are ADB members, and we are looking at the developed and the developing. And since we are also working together with UN ESCAP and the United Nations Center for Regional Development, we're also looking at Russia and Iran as well. So together, the ATO is covering 47% of the global domestic product, 55% of the global population, and 26% of the global land area. But especially this first two on GDP and population makes it clear that with the ATO, we very much know, or we have a very good idea of at least half of the global transport system. So it's quite a big assignment to implement this. Next slide. And what? Yeah. So who is the ATO team? Who are the people making this all possible? You can see here, like we have people who are working either full-time or part-time on the project. I just wanted to highlight 4 persons, that is Arthur, Mel, Urwa, and Adwaid, who are the full-time researchers. And at the same time, we're also seeing the ATO as a capacity building effort as well. So by, let's say, working with these young people and let's say, putting them on the road to become a full-fledged transport researcher, that is actually for us an important secondary objective. And so far, this is going very well, and it has been very exciting to work with them. And then, obviously, I wanted to highlight briefly Sudhir as well. That Sudhir, I think many of you know Sudhir, who has, to a large extent, is the brains of the whole outfit. Yes, next one. So the components of the ATO, we're looking at transport data. And as Alice mentioned, we're looking at transport policy. we have an analytical component, and we have an outreach component in the ATO. And let's say the webinar is part of the outreach, and I will say something more about the other three. Yeah, next one. So obviously, we are not the first organization and the first initiative who is doing transport data in Asia. So the question is like, where is this one different from earlier efforts? And you could say that one of the things is the explicit combination of working on transport data and on transport policy. That is something that when we looked at previous projects that we did not see very much. The second is that we see it as an incremental process. So what we are doing is that we are releasing the data and the policy information as it becomes available. So in the past, what you often saw is that projects would spend a lot of time on collecting the information, and then only when everything had been collected that it would become available to the outside world. And so what we are doing is that we released this week 234 indicators out of the 400 plus. We expect that we will be releasing more data shortly, and in the coming months we will also be releasing policy information as well. And then the third part is what Jamie emphasized, is the open nature of the ATO. So we are very much interested in developing partnerships for information collection, organization, and analysis. And for example, we are working together with WCTRS, the World Conference on Transport Research. And one of the persons on this call, on this webinar, is actually doing a PhD on transport and the SDGs. So we are now discussing how the ATO information can be used by this PhD candidate to actually, let's say, implement his research. And these kinds of cooperations we are very keen to establish. So anybody who has ideas on that, how they would like to work with our team, please let us know. Then we are very much encouraged by what the Vice President of ADB, Mr. Bambang Susantono, has said. That he says that the ATO will be a multi-year program, initially funded by ADB, but eventually intended to become a standalone program with funding from multiple sources. In other words, we are very much trying to develop the ATO not as a project, let's say a one-year project, but really as a multi-year program, because we feel that this knowledge will be required in many years to come. Yeah, next. Then, so the transport data. So the transport data, and Jamie mentioned a few things, what we were talking about, but we think that in order to understand the transport sector properly, we need to look at initially at 8 different areas. We need to understand what the transport infrastructure looks like, because often there is a discussion on transport in isolation of the infrastructure. And infrastructure can be anything from the road infrastructure, the rail, the aviation infrastructure, but also ICT infrastructure. Secondly, we have about 65 indicators on that. Secondly, we're looking at transport activity and services. How is this infrastructure being used? And we are looking at various modes there, as you can see in the little icons. Then transport is not done just for the sake of transport, but what we want to do is we want to create access and connectivity. So on that, we have a number of indicators. And then we have a series of indicators on 3 types of externalities: on road safety, on air pollution, and climate change. And in order to understand all of this, we need to look at the socioeconomic context in which transport is taking place. And then lastly, we had a number of indicators which were not quite clear where we should put them, so we also created a miscellaneous category. So What we will be talking about today is the first batch of indicators, which was published earlier or last week, and you can see the link where you can access those. These are mostly collected from secondary sources, and we are at the moment in the process of releasing or to develop the information on 10 to 15 primary indicators, and these will follow in late March. Yeah, next. So in terms of the data structure, if you collect 460 indicators from 51 countries, you need to have a bit of a structure into this. So one of the documents that you can find online is the master list of indicators, which explains all of the individual indicators and the definition, the source of information. There is another document, which is the ATO user guide, which you can also find online. And and then here's a little bit repetition from the previous slide with the individual workbooks. Yeah, so next slide. Yeah, keep clicking a little bit more, Nicola, because I think, yeah, okay. So for each of these 8 components, we have a workbook, and I see that Nicola is already going through the. Oh, sorry, yeah. So we have workbooks, and in the workbook you have an indicator description. You have a number of let's say qualifiers. Let's say what's the scope, what's the sector. But what is important is the hyperlinks that you see on the screen, and those indicators which are hyperlinked, we have the actual information. If you click on one of these hyperlinks, you will get a page which you see then at the bottom right, which has again the indicator title, the indicator code, the description, the scope, the mode, the sector, and let's say the source where we get the information from. And in a number of cases, we collect indicators from multiple sources, because road length is one of the examples that I will mention later. You will find that this is from, that we have collected this from, I think, 3 or 4 different sources. It varies. We are trying to create a time series for our indicators, but we are also in a number of cases dependent on what information is available. So the example that you see here is a 2018 indicator, but we also have indicators where we have time series, let's say from the 2000 up to 2019. And the idea is obviously that we will update this on a regular basis. Yeah, next. I think that the next thing is that that we planned is to show you what it looks like on the ADB website. So let's see whether this works. But yeah, so here you have the page of the transport sector on the ADB website. There you see the Asian Transport Outlook. You can click on that to say read more. So yeah, if you click on read more, Nicola, yeah, so then you also have a bit of a description of this, and then can we go to, like there it says view the data library. We are very happy to see that ADB has sufficient confidence in the data that we have, and that they have now included the ATO database in the data library of the ADB, and that ADB will also be using our data for the annual key indicators report as well. So here you have all the links on the user guide, the list of indicators, and the individual workbooks. So if we look at the infrastructure workbook, Nicola. Yeah, so then what happens is with the infrastructure workbook, you download the file on your computer. So at that point, you have actually all the raw data that which is in the ATO, that you can do whatever kind of calculations and manipulations with that as you would like to see. So in this, so you can see what it looks like, the indicator, the code, the scope, the mode, and things like that. So if we go to road length, yeah, so road length you can see, which is oh yeah, so this is and you can see that unfortunately we are not living in a perfect world. That you don't have always all of the information for all the countries, but we try to do our best. Then if on the right side of each indicator sheet, you see a country typology, and we have done this by region, sub-region, income groups, whether they are part of regional associations, so all kinds of ways and means that you can actually organize and sort the data and carry out calculations. Yeah. What you will notice is that at the moment that India data is not yet included in the shareable database, which is online. The India data will come within the next couple of weeks or next couple of months, and this is also linked to let's say discussions between the ADB and the Indian government on clearance of data which is published by the Asian Development Bank. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, let's go back to the presentation. I'm already happy that it worked, that we were actually able to do the jump from the presentation to what's on the website. Yeah. Okay. So coming back then to this other component on analysis of transport data. So on the left side, you see a number of types of analysis that we are currently working on, and obviously there is too much information to analyze everything for us. So this also means that let's say that we are very keen to work with external groups on analyzing our data. For example, the World Conference on Transport Research that I just mentioned, they have a number of special interest groups, and we are, let's say, currently in discussion with them whether they would also make use of our data in their research. We know that GIZ is coordinating a project on transport and climate change and NDCs in Asia. So we are making our information available to them as well, so that they can focus on what is important, is on developing the policy recommendations, and that they don't have to collect all the information that we have collected already. And then obviously we are also working with ADB on how they can actually incorporate and make use of the data and the policy information that we are collecting. Yeah, next. And what I mentioned is, like, just to give you a brief flavor of the complexities that you get if you collect all of this information from different sources. Like, this is road length. Let's say on the right side, you see what we call using smart data. And you see that there's also among smart data, there's quite a bit of variance in terms of what the road length is in the ATO countries. And on the left, we have mentioned, let's say, if you use the more traditional approaches like country services and things like that. And the surprising thing for us was that actually that traditional surveys actually tally quite well with smart data. And as you can see that the variation amongst the traditional approaches is actually less than what you see if you make use of satellite and other smart technology. But we think, we are not saying which one is the right one. What we are saying in the ATO is that we have this information from different sources. And to some extent, we also leave it to the users to decide which data they want to use for what purpose. Yeah, next. Then road safety is another example. We know that road safety is being reported to at the global level through 3 different channels: country reporting, the global burden of disease, and the World Health Organization with the global status report. And you see that typically that the country reporting here is actually lower than what the GBD and WHO are reporting. Yeah. Next. In terms of policy, what are we looking at in terms of transport policy? We started the work on data, so we have more detailed work on data, but we are more or less coming towards the end of an initial policy assessment in the 51 countries. What we have done there is that we have looked at what is the national development vision, what is the vision for transport that countries have. Linked to that, we looked at what are the infrastructure targets, what are the service targets, and what are the externality targets. And as you can see that these 3 targets boxes relate also to the workbooks that we mentioned in the data. We're all interested to look at how is transport organized at the national level and what are the devolved powers in terms of transport. Currently, we have about 1,000 pages of country profiles, which is obviously too much to actually make available. So what we are at the moment working on is a synthesis of all of the policy information. We are doing this also with respect to the relevant SDG targets: 3.6 on road safety, 9.1 on infrastructure, 9.c on internet, 11.2 on urban transport, as well as the Paris Agreement. Yeah, next. And while we are still working on it, we already have some ideas, let's say, that come out of the assessment. In terms of the alignment with the SDG targets in the 51 countries and regions that we looked at, we see a relatively good alignment with SDG target 3.6 on road safety and internet access. And we see a poorer alignment with the access-related targets on transport, infrastructure, rural access, and urban access. In terms of the Paris Agreement, generally climate change mitigation and adaptation is not well mainstreamed in transport policy, and the ambition levels that we see so far are too low. Then target setting for transport infrastructure and transport activity are not well articulated in transport policies. In the 51 countries that we look at, we see that about 2/3 have a transport policy. Out of those countries, which, let's say the 36 countries which have a transport policy, at least half of the countries have their transport policy before the adoption of the SDGs and the adoption of the Paris Agreement. So we also see that if you don't have a recent transport policy, it's also more difficult to actually incorporate the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. We hope to be able to share a document on this with you later, and this will either be available late March or early April. Next. Then one of the side products of the ATO is the Annotated Transport Policy Document Directory. Since we have been looking at all of these countries, we have also collected all the policy documents for these countries. So we expect that in April that we will have an annotated repository of transport policy documents available online. And as you can see, we are looking at this. There are a number of annotations with respect to whether this is at the national level or whether this is at the subsector level, whether this is about which subsectors of transport are addressed, which externalities are addressed, and then more importantly, what is the link where you can find the document. So we thought that this would be a nice service for the transport community as well. Yeah, next. Then I think that, yeah, it is clear that it is sometimes difficult to find the detailed information on individual countries, or it is sometimes difficult to validate the data or the policy information that you can find online. And so what we're also doing is that we are building a resource person directory in which we are looking for persons who are willing to help validate the data and to help source missing information. And this is something that we will be working on in the coming weeks and months as well. But as indicated here, volunteers are needed. So if you think that you know something and that you're willing to work with us for your country on the ATO and the transport sector, please let us know. You can already indicate in the chat if you are willing to do that, and then we will contact you after that. Yeah. Then in terms of the next steps of the ATO, incrementally we would like to make the ATO the go-to knowledge base on transport for the ATO economies. We are in discussions, for example, with NUMO, the New Urban Mobility Organization, and the Global Partnership on Informal Transport, on building research alliances. We are broadening the ATO institutional base by working with the ADB Transport Sector Group and, for example, the country offices. We are in discussions, for example, with the World Bank on how they can also contribute to the ATO as well. And what we would like to do in 2021 is make the ATO relevant to regional and global transport processes. So we know that the COP is coming up in November. So obviously we would have a lot of information on transport and climate change, which would be relevant for the COP, and likewise for the, let's say, for the SDG related discussions as well. I just wanted to mention specifically the EST process in Asia, and I think several of you are familiar with that, which is coordinated by UNCRD. And we are actually looking at how to use the ATO to track the implementation of the new declaration on sustainable transport, which hopefully would be adopted in November, or sorry, in October of this year in Japan. And then obviously community building is very much important because the size of the challenge is far bigger. And even though that there are very good people in our team, we definitely can use your help. With that, I would like to hand over back to, oh, wait a moment, there's one more slide. Sorry, yeah, one more. Yeah, so the older people are probably familiar what John F. Kennedy said in 1963. Don't ask what the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. So to paraphrase that, do ask us what the ATO can do for you, but also ask what you can do for the ATO. So in other words, if you think that we are missing indicators which are relevant to your organization, please let us know. At the same time, we need to be certain that information is available because we don't like to include indicators for which there is no information. Secondly, please make available data and policy information that you have so that we can incorporate it. And then thirdly, let's say, if you are working on a certain type of research and you think that this research overlaps with what the ATO is looking at, then to some extent we are willing to prioritize information collection that would be helpful for your research. Yeah. And then what is it that you can do for us? Volunteer as a country resource person, help us locate missing data and information, let's say, help validate ATO information. Like, for example, there was some data that we came across with about extensive railway activity in Brunei Darussalam. And I'm pretty much certain that there is no railway in Brunei. And so from time to time, these kinds of things will happen, that there are data in the ATO which actually make no sense. So if you come across those, let us know. Please share data. And if you are interested in a joint information collection exercise, please approach us as well, and then we can discuss how we can do that. Yeah, and now back to Alice. Sorry.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you so much for taking us through the ATO. And now we would like to have maybe about 10 minutes for some questions from the audience. So Nicola has already invited us. If you have any questions, please type in through the chat box. We don't see any questions coming in at this moment, but we assume maybe you're still typing up, so we'll give it a moment. Yes, please. I just hear some voice, so if you would like to raise a question right now, you can also just unmute and introduce yourself, please.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, sure. And well, I'm sorry, I cannot see the full name being displayed, so would you mind introduce yourself?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
My name is Shafiqur Rahman from Bangladesh. As Courtney mentioned, if someone wish to do some data collection, so who will be the contact person regarding that? So that's very brief query.
Sorry. First of all, nice to see you again, because we haven't met in a long time. But could you just, because there was a little bit of noise in the system, can you just repeat the question? Because it was about information collection.
Yes. So who will be the contact person to discuss further regarding those issues and things?
Yeah. As you could see in the presentation, there is one email address, which is ato@slowcatpartnership.org.
Okay.
That I think that you can write to that, but please feel free to write to me as well. That we're a small informal team, and whoever you approach in the team, I'm certain that the request would be picked up. In terms of information collection, we are a regional effort. So for us, we are interested in the national level data within the regional context. You've seen the scope of the ATO, so that's quite I think quite clear. What we did not mention is that in the following phase, there will also be an emphasis on urban transport as well. So at the moment, all of the information is pretty much national level data, but our hope is that in the second phase, that we will also be able to establish a city database. And we know that a lot of people are working on urban transport as well. And this was also mentioned in the word clouds at the beginning. So that's also something that we expect that the second phase will start in May. So anybody who is interested in urban data can already approach us, because we obviously will need a couple of months to plan the second phase and to decide on what we are going to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to both of you. Any other questions from the audience? If you want, you can just unmute and share your question.
Yeah, and then, so sorry, Alice, I see it in chat that there was a question from Razon Chandra Saha, who's asking, as a PhD researcher, how I should contribute. So I would say it's not just a question of how you should contribute, but it's also, as a researcher, you're always looking for data. So I would also say, like, please feel free to use our data, but the best thing would be is that if you are interested in doing a PhD on a topic which is related to the scope of the ATO, is just to send us an email and then preferably with a description of your research, and then we can see, then we can have a follow-up discussion on how we can actually work together, what would be the best way. And obviously, if you do that, it's always good to involve your supervisor as well, so that he or she is aware of your intention to work with the ATO team. Yeah.
I see that there are a lot of questions about getting information of the webinar afterwards. So right after, when we wrap up, there will be, and in fact, in the presentation, we have shown the URL of the ATO webpage. So you're very welcome to, we will be uploading the results of the webinar to the website, so you can refer back to it. We can also send a follow-up email to the participants afterwards. Courtney, if we do not receive this, we just have one more question. Yes. So is there any this is from Hansel Maya. Is there any priority research agenda from ATO?
I think that this is an intriguing question because we said that the ATO is an open knowledge platform. So what we are saying is that we are providing the information, and the priority will be set by the users. Like you have the road safety community, they would be looking at the data that we are collecting from a road safety perspective. The climate change community will be looking at the data and say that they will be prioritizing climate change. So from our perspective, I think that the priority of the ATO is actually organizing the knowledge process. That because I think in too many cases in the past, there was a narrow scope in data collection based on just on, for example, climate. Because if you just focus on climate, then you would not collect the information about rural access. You would not collect the information on road safety. And so since we are supporting the entire operations of the Asian Development Bank in terms of transport, ADB's investments in transport traditionally have been on roads, but increasingly we see that this is shifting towards urban transport. We see that they are increasing their support for rail. And at the same time, we also see that within the context of the ADB, the scaling up from individual projects to sector assistance is becoming important as well. So what we are trying to do is to build a very broad foundation of transport knowledge, that for anybody who is interested in transport in Asia, to include that information. So then I see that Heather has a question on active transport. The big weakness at the moment in secondary and primary data is the data on walking and cycling. So we are very much interested in this, and this is also something that we are looking at to work with Benjamin La Peña in the global on formal transport, is to actually see how we can include that element as well. We do not have the capacity to do field-based research in 51 countries. So we are dependent on what is available from secondary sources and what is available from, let's say, from country statistics. Likewise, we are aware that gender is a key issue when it comes to transport as well. Everybody talks about how important it is, but at the same time, it is very difficult to find detailed data on this. So we can flag this, that the data is not there, and what data is available we can incorporate. But if the data does not exist, we can include. Is there any Hyperloop transport study in Asia? I would say I hope not. Because but that's my private opinion that let's say that Hyperloop will not appear in the ATO because for the simple reason that at the moment it's not there. Like if it would be there in one country, then it's not enough to say like to include it. Anybody interested in Hyperloops will probably have to find his or her answers somewhere else, but not in the ATO. And then, this is a very interesting suggestion. So also from Heather, whether we should standardize collection methods. This is something that we have been discussing. I think that at some point, we are running into the problem that different countries define transport in different manners. And the way that we are trying to address that is that we are collecting the information at the lowest level of disaggregation. So once we have the very detailed information, we can try to understand what is meant by that, and we can actually see how we can combine this into categories so that it becomes comparable between countries. We think that if we look at the time, energy, resource, and efforts it took in Europe to come to a standardized system of transport indicators, that we think that at this moment our time is better spent in actually collecting the information and to point out what kind of difficulties there are in comparing between countries, and then leave it to relevant intergovernmental bodies like UN ESCAP, if they would want to pick this up and say to come up with standardization. We can provide arguments and suggestions then to UN ESCAP, but it's not within the mandate of the ATO to actually suggest to countries to change the way that they develop and maintain the transport statistics. We don't think that we would be successful in that. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Courtney, for all of the answers, and thank you for those who have asked these wonderful questions. So I believe it's time for us to wrap up, and yeah, thank you, Nicola. So please continue to follow us on Twitter. You can follow us through the hashtag Asian Transport Outlook, or as we have mentioned, we will be posting more updates from the webinar and also continue updates on the project through the following links. You're also very welcome to reach out to us through the email listed here. So thank you again for your participation and for your interest in ATO, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and anybody who still wants to hear the whole story one more time, let's say in 5 hours we will repeat this for Europe and the Americas.
That is right. Watch it like a movie if you want to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.